time. How did Pontiac, how was he able to communicate with these different tribes? Did he go and visit them? Do we know? I mean, he didn't write them letters, or how does he?
The Indians would send agents, their runners or people, messengers, and they did it with their wampum belts, which is how they communicated. Belts had certain meanings that were beaded together, and that's how they did. Of course, they traveled through the Great Lakes and the major tributaries like the Wabash River or down Maumee, down by Toledo and so forth. And so news could travel pretty fast. And of course, the traders at this time were still trading, French and British. That was the whole commodity. And that's another thing why we wanted to do this book, for a lot of our young people to know. It's interest for us that are interested in the military aspects and the action of what happened. But it's more than that. It's how was Michigan settled? What was the culture here? Why were these people here? It was the fur trade and the cultural aspects, the trade for your everyday living commodities. They needed those to live on. And so that's how they made a living. And similar to like today's, in recent days, we've heard about the economy problems that we've had with banking. Well, that was their banking system, the fur trade, and the traders and the natives and the British and the French and the settlers all depended on each other for trade goods and the fur trade, and that's what that was all about. So that's what's so interesting, to learn about the cultural aspects that were intertwined in this and how those people were affected by the military aspects too, and not just the governmental aspects for trying to take over the land and so forth.
Now, the siege of Detroit and most of these activities were in the summer of 1763, but as fall comes on, there are other concerns like storing up food for the winter.
Yes.
And so the agrarian nature of the native communities played into this too, right? I mean, they just they didn't have the resources to sustain.
And when they found that, for example, to talk about Detroit, since we're concentrating in Michigan, they couldn't take the fort. The British would send reinforcements from Fort Niagara out east and so forth as best they could. The Indians would try to attack that, but they never were able to take the fort. And so then when it started getting cold weather in the fall, they had to leave and go back to their winter settlements, which were like in northern Ohio and so forth, and do hunting and prepare for the winter so that they didn't starve, because they weren't able to get supplies in. They had to rely on themselves for supplies as opposed to the British supplying out there. The other aspect that's interesting that goes along with that, the counterpart, is that, as I mentioned previously, the British government had the huge war debt from the French Indian War, and so at the same time this started up, they were trying to cut down on their military, and so they eliminated a lot of regiments, including the 60th Regiment, which was the British regiment that had all the Michigan forts that were out here, and they went from like, for example, from 4 battalions down to 2. So they had a shortage of manpower to fight, to wage the counterattacks against the Indians. So, and then of course the colonies wanted protection against the Indians, the settlers out in the wilderness areas like New York and Ohio against these, but they didn't want to pay for it. And so they felt that the colonial legislatures or governments and the British military should foot the bill for that, which is another reason that led eventually in the American Revolution.
So I think we should talk about that a little bit. This, you've already shown that this follows on the heels of the French Indian War, and the expense of that leads to the British having this huge debt. They're overextended, their resources are spread too thin. This makes them vulnerable. They don't have the resources maybe to continue the same generous policies towards the natives, so we have this rebellion. And now you're saying that, well, there's also tension between the British and the colonists, and the colonists are saying, hey, you got to protect us, and the British are saying, oh, you're going to have to pay for it. And so this controversy then helps sow the seeds somewhat for the revolution, right?
Yes. There was in Pennsylvania and Virginia, legislatures had to call and try to raise a lot of the riflemen and militia troops to help the British military for the end of the Pontiac in 1764. And then after that was put down, then of course the British, again, as we were saying, are trying to collect monies to pay for that. And then that's when the Stamp Act came in and all these other tariffs on the people. And then and also the billeting of troops. a lot of these forts were in outlying areas, but when they came to the major cities, they didn't have any place to put the British soldiers, and so the townspeople would have to have their soldiers in their own homes. And then when the British wanted to build barracks, they didn't want to pay for it. And of course, the Stamp Act tariff was 1765, and that was repealed. And this just led up into the American Revolution. A lot of our British officers who, as you mentioned, George Washington and Henry Knox and a lot of these people who fought for the British eventually became some of our greatest American military officers during the American Revolution.
So when we read about the Revolution and we hear about the colonists being unhappy with the taxes, they're saying no taxation without representation. The
Correct.
Taxes in part are to pay off the debt from the French Indian War, but also the taxes are to provide for the colonists' defense,
Correct.
to pay for the military force which is garrisoning
Sure.
forts in Michigan.
Correct.
So Michigan really kind of is in an interesting position here on the
Yes.
frontier and is really at the center of a lot of the policy debate
Yes.
that's evolving.
Yes, it's interesting because people just, again, if you know about this, they think it's an isolated incident, and it's really not. They're all, as you mentioned, all tied in, and that's so fascinating to read how this evolved and just fascinating. And then the fact to go see some of these sites right here in our own state or Ohio, and a lot of them are not, haven't had the luck of being able to be preserved, like Michilimackinac or St. Joe and so forth. And a lot of, as development has gone over the years and progress, and a lot of the sites have been obliterated. But that was another fun part of doing the book, was to go to see these sites and see where the forts were, what happened, and so forth.
Now, you participate in the annual reenactment at Michilimackinac. And
Yes.
When does that take place?
I'm glad you brought that up. That's the Fort Michilimackinac pageant is just completed its 46th year, and we're hoping it'll go to 50, but we're hoping. But that's Memorial Weekend every year, and that was started back in 1963 by the citizens of Mackinac City, kind of the kickoff, if you will, for the
anniversary.
Exactly, and the summer, their summer tourist for people who come up on vacation, and it was also. Helped the script based on original incidents up there. It tells the history of the entire fort through the French heritage, and then culminates with the Pontiac Indian attack. But it was also written by the people from the History and Theater Department here at Michigan State University, and through the Mackinac State Historic Parks, which allows them to use the site. And so this is the 46th year, and I've been kindly been afforded to do Captain Etherington's role the past several years. I've been in it for 20-some years.
And he's come through unscathed.
Yes, and they won't let us change the script every year. But there's 400 cast members, half townspeople, people from down here who come every year. It's free performance, so the general public is treated to a free performance each day, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And you can talk with people. All the uniforms and Indian outfits are all historically researched and made by the people, and it's just it's a great event, and you get about 2,000 people watching each performance. So it's just a really interesting thing and a good way to see history instead of just reading about it in a book.
Todd, we just have a minute left,
Sure.
but if somebody's interested in your book, where can they find it?
The Michigan Historical Library bookstore carries it down here. You can get it at Barnes & Noble's. They can order it, or you can go online and directly get it from the publisher, Purple Mountain Press, New York. They have a website. And then my co-author and I, we sell them ourselves, either through our websites or when we go to some events, reenactments, or like the Kalamazoo show.
Are you
Living History
coming,
Show.
that'll be this fall?
That's the Kalamazoo Living History Show is always the third weekend in March down at the fairgrounds
next
there.
spring. All right, well, we'll hope to see you then. Thanks for coming
Well,
on
thank
my
you very
program.
much for having me. Appreciate
All right.
it very much.
Thanks for watching Current Events with Tom George. I'll be back next month.